At this point, I'd like to introduce us, your hosts, Sharing Connection. We are a Denver-based real estate nonprofit. I am Emily Nilsson, I'm the operations director, and this is Ed Anderson, our CEO and founder. And at this point, I would like to hand it over to Ed.
Thank you, Emily. It's quite a pleasure for me to be here. I never really had an inclination that when Sharing Connections thought first came that I'd be standing in front of a group of distinguished people like this audience, and I really want to thank you for your participation, and Emily certainly for all she's done to get this to where we are. First slide is a mission and vision statement, and this is the first one that I'm going to read, but I almost need my glasses here. Sharing Connections' mission is to provide affordable housing organizations and nonprofits with real estate expertise, funding, and preservation. And our vision is that real estate philanthropy will empower nonprofits and expand affordable housing options. That did not happen. That just evolved over the past 7 years of Sharing Connection. When I was young, I always had a passion for affordable housing, and I really don't know why. I can't tell you any specific facts, but it's just been in my blood. It's not part of my family background. And I really didn't do anything actionable until the RTC days, which some of you remember, and some of you probably weren't born yet. But in the RTC era, I was fortunate enough to be able to pick up about 1,000 units in North Aurora. We would buy a property, fix it up, make it safe and habitable housing for the residents of North Aurora that were really struggling at the time. And still there's certainly some issues in North Aurora. So after the 1,000 units, my career took me throughout the U.S. and was fortunate enough to try to take over a hedge fund in Luxembourg and worked as a leader for development in Incheon, Korea. And throughout that entire time, I kept thinking, well, I need to do something to give back. And it was always after that next project I would do it. And one of the assets that we picked up was the Denver West Office Park, 1.5 million square feet and $100+ million investment in Golden. And when we sold it in 2014, it was not going to be a bigger deal, and that was the time to give back. So I started Sharing Connection with a somewhat of a vision. I didn't know exactly where it was going to be, and through our connections and our programs evolved, and we'll get into the program stage later, but first I just want to be able to acknowledge the team that's taken us to that point. And if you wouldn't mind, our board, if you wouldn't mind just standing up and being recognized, we've got just an incredible board that is got a, here's our board. We have an array of experience in real estate finance, investments, development, legal, construction, affordable housing, and nonprofits. And I personally just want to thank everyone for their involvement in it today. We also have an advisory board made up of 25 people, friends and colleagues that I've known for a very long part of my history and career. 1,000 years experience roughly combined between all of the advisory board members who have been very instrumental in Sharing Connection for its start and where we are today. We do have 11 board members, 25 advisory committee members, and we have had 3,000 hours of volunteers from all of our board and advisory board. So, and for the advisory board, if you are here, if you wouldn't mind standing up and just being recognized. And our team itself, Emily and Justin. Emily standing already, and Justin somewhere back there. But we have an...
Might be at the registration table.
But we have just an incredible team, and I thank everyone. So I think, Emily, back to you.
So now to get into a little bit more of what we do, we focus on serving nonprofits and affordable housing. We assist with financing through our real estate impact program, displacement through our real estate rescue program, and fundraising help through our real estate donation program. This program provides short-term gap financing in the form of bridge, pre-development, and acquisition loans. Our real estate impact lending supports affordable housing and nonprofit developments and the rehabilitation of facilities. Practically, this affects real lives. Bud's Warehouse is a fantastic nonprofit. They were struggling with their current space. They needed to move to an area where their constituents were located, and we helped finish out their capital stack with a bridge loan. And we were involved with them for about 5 years, and they were able to pay that off. Great organization. We welcome you to go visit. They help ex-convicts and people who are learning job skills, as well as doing some cabinetry work and some other stuff. Spring Creek Apartments, we did a bridge loan for them for both affordable and workforce housing, up to, if you're familiar with area median income, up to 120% area median income, which is really, really important for the mountain communities, because this is a place in Gypsum where they need to work in a very high cost area. I'll tell you about our real estate rescue program. This program is designed to help keep nonprofits in their communities and preserve affordable housing options. When a community serving organization is displaced, relocation can be difficult and constituents can be left with nowhere to go. Sharing Connection has a unique short-term acquisition program. We purchase the facility, we act as property owner, we stabilize the property and offer subsidized rent. We set up a 3-year purchase option and shield that tenant from market appreciation. This provides time to finance and fundraise for the facility, aiding in long-term stability for the organization. Again, this program affects real lives. There was an organization handling transitional housing for sex trafficking victims, and they came to us, and this was how the program was born. They said, our landlord has given us 30 days to find a new facility, and we don't know what's gonna happen to our girls. This is a safe house. It's really, really important that our girls stay in this location. And so we went in, we purchased the facility, and Real Estate Rescue was born. They were able to purchase it, and were able to keep those girls stable in housing for several years. We also have a project underway right now. We're working with Caring and Sharing, and I know Dara and Tony are out there somewhere, but they are a food bank and resource center in Aurora, Colorado. Their landlord was also selling, and we wanted to make sure that they could stay in that space and serve the current constituents. We know that food bank work is really important, and people really rely on those locations. Next, we have our real estate donation program, and I'm going to let the video speak for itself, and then I'm going to give Ed the mic to talk about a real program that we did.
You want to keep your nonprofit successful and maximize donations so that you can serve as many people as possible. But receiving a donation of real estate can seem like more trouble than it's worth. Enter Sharing Connection. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, and we're here to help other nonprofits maximize real estate donations. We do this by managing the process from start to finish. Through our expertise, we make the process less complicated, mitigate risk, and turn donated property into working cash on your behalf. Here's how it works. We take the title to the property, securing your position through a deed restriction and a signed agreement. We handle all upfront property costs, from insurance to fees to improvements to selling costs. And we act as property manager, so the property is well taken care of until it's sold. We coordinate the entire sales process, and after property-related costs are reimbursed, you'll get 90% of the funds. Sharing Connection gets 10%, which goes directly to our other charitable programs, Real Estate Impact and Real Estate Rescue. With decades of combined experience in the real estate industry and a passion for giving back to our communities, Sharing Connection is here to take the complexity out of real estate donations and make sure you're not leaving any dollars on the table. To learn more, visit sharingconnection.org and contact us today.
Thank you. The real estate donation program was one of my passion programs that very initially I thought would really take Sharing Connection into a new stratosphere. The first project that we had was introduced to us by one of our advisory board members and to Children's Hospital and the foundation. They were about to receive a 25-acre parcel of land with a home on it in Estes Park that had a tremendous amount of building code violations and issues associated with it. And Sharing Connection saw the vision for that property, and they graciously directed the donation to Sharing Connection. And over a 2.5-year period, and several $100,000, we were able to cure building code violations, subdivide the property, extend utilities, roads and electrical. And Children's Hospital received about $1.2 million, which was 2 to 2.5 times more than if they had fire sold the property. So that's just a great kickoff program that really is true to my heart. It's a great project. So Sharing Connections had just a tremendous impact for a young organization in our community. It's been $5.9 million has been invested in the community, focused on real estate projects, and we've helped 25 organizations. And I can't go without thanking First Bank for its $30 million credit facility that has helped fund and take Sharing Connection into the next world. What's new? Another project, a passion of mine, is Hawaii. We have opened an office in Hawaii. It's my goal to take Sharing Connection nationwide within the next 3-ish years, and Hawaii is a good kickoff on that. We are looking at a project that will provide close to 1,000 units of workforce housing in Maui. And with that.
Yeah, so I'm super excited about our Hawaii office that has launched, and of course you're going to be seeing more of us in Colorado as well. So we're going to be hosting more events, have more learning opportunities like this. We really want to make sure that we're positioned as someone who is supporting community-focused real estate within this space, and I know so many of you who are here today are already in this space, and that's super exciting. We'll also be expanding capacity and staff within the next year, and we're going to be moving more of those dollars out the door. I really invite you to connect with us. We're huge on collaboration, and a lot of things that have been born, that we've done, have been born out of creativity and collaboration, and we'd love to sit down and talk with you. Feel free to stop by the registration desk and let us know, and I'll make sure to reach out and make sure that we can get a time on the calendar to talk. That said, I would now like to introduce Albus. Albus will be coming to the stage. He is going to be our moderator for the panel. In 2011, Albus defeated 38 opponents to become the youngest African American ever elected to Denver City Council. Serving 2 terms on Denver City Council, including 2 terms as council president, Albus accomplished an ambitious range of progressive legislative victories with the goal of building a truly inclusive city. To address the affordability crisis, he co-created Denver's first and Colorado's largest affordable housing fund. To make Denver a more equitable place to grow up, he funded and expanded the Denver preschool program, providing universal access to preschool for all 4-year-olds. Along with his position at Millinder White, Albus sits on multiple boards and commissions and has been a part of many national and international fellowship programs. Thank you so much for joining us, Albus. Albus will be introducing the rest of the panel.
All right, good morning. How you guys doing? Good. We're going to get going here. Oh, yeah. Go get the clicker here. While we have Ed and Emily exiting, can we give them a hand? This is incredible. I think we as a community in Denver are different than, I travel nationally, work nationally around cities and city building, and we're different here. Our proximity to each other, our proximity in class and race and everything else gives us the opportunity to actually give back and make sure people are a part of the success of the city. I don't like when we measure economics purely on economic trends. I like measuring economics on mobility, social mobility, right? How does the lowest individuals in our society, do they have the opportunity to go to the next level? And I think programs like this help us to do that. So with that, if you guys want to move to Hawaii, I'm happy to be a part of that thing. That's pretty cool, Hawaii, right? But that's exciting. And so this is what we're going to talk about a little bit today is really what does it mean to move, the meter and making sure that we are a more inclusive city and making sure that we are giving back and how do we judge success in our city? And I think our panelists are really going to help with that. And so, and I know each of these individuals very well for a long time, and I'm excited to have them share a little bit about what they're up to and really ask some really hard questions about how do we really take this to the next level. So first, he needs no introduction. You know him, Mark Falcone, who is a leader in the city. Mark founded Continuum Partners in 1997. That's actually when I came to Denver, so cool. But 1997, and what he's done here has been incredible. Since its inception, Continuum has successfully completed over $3 billion of real estate development and established itself as a national leader of complex, mixed-use, urban infill projects. Throughout his career, Mark has been actively engaged in the dialogue to advance more sustainable settlement patterns within his industry amongst public policymakers. And you're going to hear a little bit about what he just passed at the state, helped pass at the state. Over the years, Mark has served in several volunteer leadership positions all over the city for the Nature Conservancies and non-for-profit affordable housing developer and other various organizations focused on some of these issues and challenging our built environment. Mark has also served on other boards, including NEA's Mayor's Institute on City Design, and Colgate University, the University of Denver, and the Bonfils-Stanton Foundation. Give it up for Mark Falcone. David and I have known each other since my days on city council, and he's such an incredible leader in this city. David Foster is a partner at Foster Graham, Millstone, and Cashier. David's legal practice is focused on land use real estate development matters. David is also involved in many government affairs issues, both at the local and state level. To those who know David, they consider him a deal maker and uniquely adept at balancing public and private issues and interests, and finding a better way to do the deal better in terms of creativity, efficiency, and the ability to bring parties with seemingly disparate interests to common good and common ground. David also serves on the Colorado Mesa University Board of Trustees. Give it up for David. Now we'll go to Rachel Harms. Rachel is a senior project manager at the Wells Partnership. Rachel brings the experience of an architectural, educational background, interior design, and general contracting work experience to bear in her management of development projects at TWP. Rachel spent 3 years as an engineer at PCL Construction in Denver. During that tenure, her project experience included interior tenant finish, work, ground up, office building construction, school renovation projects for Denver Public Schools, civil and infrastructure work. Rachel's primary focus at TWP includes the life science building, civil infrastructure and office space, and multifamily. Rachel is currently on the Crew Board of Directors and currently serving as the president-elect. Give it up for Rachel. We're going to let each of our panelists do a quick presentation, and then we'll ask them some questions. And I think we'll start off with Mark.
Well, I really am happy to be here, and I'm also thrilled that this event is being hosted in this space, because this is a building that we were involved with the purchase and protection of a year ago, and I think it aligns incredibly well with the conversation today. I have to say I was thrilled to learn about the sharing connection. I think it's a remarkable enterprise, and I think Ed, you and your team are going to make immeasurable legacy impacts on our community and whatever other communities you choose to do this in. Honestly, I think that, I like to think about real estate as the ecosystem for the Homo sapien, and it's always interesting. I spent a lot of time in leadership roles with the Nature Conservancy, and I think we are actually more skilled at evaluating the health and well-being of populations that are not our own species. And it occurred to me over the years in those various capacities that we don't do a good enough job of evaluating and measuring how well the physical habitats that we create serve the broader species that we are trying to address. So I like to say that we are effectively in the business of building the human habitat, and we are, if we're particularly good at it, we become human ecologists. And certainly those of us that have benefited from this rapid rise in value in Denver over the last 25 years, can take a lot of credit for having created a high-functioning habitat. But the truth is that if if that habitat is not serving the needs of the entire community, we're leaving not to get too Malthusian here, because some people are very motivated by the empathic intervention of rebalancing the justice of these economic mechanisms. But even if you're not driven by that, if you're a pure, hard-nosed economist, when our built mechanism does not serve the needs of the entire community, when you start to see that the upward mobility of the entire population is not moving well, if this was the Nature Conservancy, we would jump in and we would shift the physical habitat to address that problem. So if you step back and look at it from a more clinical sort of standpoint, the truth is we've got an enormous amount of the resource in our community that is not being maximized. And so the long-term economic well-being of our city will be much better served if we create an environment where all of our human capital is given the opportunity to make the maximum contribution it can. And to do that, we have to give people housing security. We have to give them access to the mobility that they need to be able to seek the highest performing opportunities for them and their families. So I like to just take a step back. I mean, I certainly, on a personal level, align with a lot of the intention and motivation of rebalancing the equity in our city. But as an investor in this city, I think we also run the perilous risk of, if we don't ensure that our city does it, then we will lose some of the economic momentum we fought so hard to create. And what I'm going to talk about today is in part driven by this real need that we observed to bring some new innovations to the table that would help address these inequities. I spent a lot of time listening to a lot of moaning from my colleagues in our industry about all the new regulation that is trying to do that through a regulating way. And the truth is that is an inefficient way to get there. But it's the response to us as an industry not bringing the innovations forward to address the problem ourselves. And I think, Ed, what you guys are doing is a remarkable innovation. And I think it is incumbent on us, if we don't want to sit back and be burdened with a regulating response, it's up to us to initiate innovations that will seek to rebalance these inequities and allow us to realize the maximum potential of our entire workforce. So that's really, in part, some of the motivation about this project that I'm going to talk about. Last year, we established something called a 501c3 called the Denver Cultural Property Trust. And the intention of the Denver Cultural Property Trust is to create a landlord entity that is a not-for-profit that can hold enterprise space and residential units at a long-term affordable basis for the benefit of the members of the cultural enterprise of our city. We were interested in the much broader topic of housing affordability for the middle-income population and the key workforces in our city, but we also recognized that there was a subset of that population, people who worked in the cultural enterprise of the city, that have had a lot to do with Denver's sort of zeitgeist sort of expansion. And when you start to hear about working artists having to leave the city, you start to hear about our performing arts organizations not being able to sort of retain and recruit the talent, and you even extend that to our university positions, our teaching positions, and you realize that we are losing an economic advantage that we have leaned into for a long time. My wife and I have had a particularly close relationship with a lot of the cultural organizations in the city, and so this was also an area that we had a lot of specific personal interest in. So the idea was that we would create, right now, as those of you that are involved in the affordable housing space know, the IRS basically says there is no charitable purpose, really, in providing housing for anybody earning more than 60% of the AMI. Well, that's probably okay in Columbus, Ohio, but in the West Coast, in the economies that drive the largest share of our GDP across the country, that's a joke. And so for those of you that have engaged in these challenges in Denver, you know that housing attainability up to 120% of AMI, and you get up into the mountain corridors up to 150% of AMI, is really out of reach at this point. So our idea was, with the Denver Cultural Property Trust, to form a 501c3 that could break through that income limit for housing. And also the key idea was to take these organizations that had benefited from being in the center city, that are getting pushed out because their rents are going up, to also provide them expansion and long-term space stability as well. We talked a little bit about the middle-income housing dilemma. I think that the data on this stuff is kind of crazy. Across the country, the ratio of median income to housing costs generally has always hovered around 2.5 to 3. Well, in places like Southern California, it's now 10. In Colorado, it's like 7 or 8 now in Denver, in the metro area. I mean, we are now, as you well understand, one of the least affordable cities in the country. Well, if you don't think that is hurting our GDP and our economic growth, you aren't paying attention. It certainly has benefited those of us that have asset inventories that are benefiting from these rapid rises in value, but it's a short-term gain that will cost us in the long run. There's a couple of more data points here that I won't bother to go into, because I think most of you probably know them viscerally if you don't know them specifically. But the reason, again, that we focused on the arts and cultural enterprises is because we recognize the important role that they have in the economic vitality of the city, and also just the quality of life. As people who have lived and worked in Denver for 25 years, I don't want to live in a city that becomes void of that rich activity. So the Denver Cultural Property Trust is I mentioned, one of our efforts to address this. We also had the good fortune of helping to create a new middle-income housing authority at the state level in May, which will actually now create a broad-based housing authority similar to CHAFA. It won't have the same financing capabilities that CHAFA has, but it basically is a landlord ownership vehicle where private developers, like most of us in this room, can actually go build a project on a fee-driven basis that will be owned and held by this independent authority that will be professionally operated and managed by real estate experts for the purpose of providing long-term rent-stable housing on a voluntary basis, right? This is not a regulated response. This is an innovation that the government is facilitating, but the private sector is going to have to be the ones that come to the table and expand this. Ultimately, that vehicle can tap into for long-term permanent financing, the tax-exempt municipal finance market, which is this monstrous, capital flow that does about 400 to 500 billion of new issuances a year. Those of you that are involved in Title 32 districts know it well and understand the power of it. We have now put ourselves in a position where in Colorado, we can tap into that capital flow to create middle-income housing. So back to this building. This building is a building that the Museum of Contemporary Art had been using on a rental basis for some of their public education programs, their adult education programs in particular. It was owned by a handful of individuals that were co-pastors in a church, and they operated the building as a personal investment, but for the benefit of their church. Their church expanded, they had to move, and they wanted to put the building on the market. Now, they wanted to be in a position where they could realize the appreciation that they had created personally through this investment. They're very charitable people. They were going to put some of the money back into their church, but they weren't in a position where they could afford to give the building away. The broker that was involved in the building, let the museum know that it was in play. There were several conventional private development pursuers in the building, and when we learned about it, because of we've got a long history and relationship with the Museum of Contemporary Art, we recognized this was the perfect kind of project for this vehicle that we had just launched. So on Continuum's balance sheet, we actually stepped in and we put a big deposit down on the building to buy ourselves the time needed to get to a closing with this vehicle. Because the owners were very aligned in our purpose, they were very collaborative. They wanted the building to end up in a situation where they thought it would serve the community on an ongoing basis. We had to do things that we wouldn't do in a normal real estate transaction. We gave them $1 million deposit. We released it to the seller before closing. I mean, we did things that we wouldn't normally do, and Continuum wasn't in a position to sort of mine a profit out of this. We were simply stewarding it until the not-for-profit was in a position to actually capitalize it. It was ultimately capitalized with a $4 million first loan by PacWest Bank, and then a $4 million cash flow note by the Zoma Foundation. And the intention is that the underwriting shows that the Zoma Foundation should be able to realize a 6% cumulative tax-exempt return on their position, and of course the bank is getting a conventional interest rate. The vehicle now has the ability to borrow on a tax-exempt basis with a commercial bank, and that will give us the ability to lower that cost of capital further going forward. This building includes 15 apartments. It's got some retail space, all of which are going to be programmed inside of this Denver Cultural Property Trust and aligned with its mission and purpose. And by the way, the museum now leases on a long-term basis this space. The museum, for a moment, started to think about trying to buy this building themselves, and very quickly realized that the board didn't have the appetite to take on a new capital project, and that really aligned well. And we said, well, of course, that's why we exist. We are a landlord that can hold these assets on a beneficial way for you. The other properties that we put into this are 8 apartments that are over in 5 Points. And again, Continuum built these on its balance sheet first as a way to sort of experiment with housing types that could, accommodate 4 dwelling units in a single-family lot in a single-family building. But we always knew, because of the way we had to kind of position this, given the current zoning code, that it had to be set up for co-living. And we always believed that it would be a good fit for artists. So we have a partnership with Redline, who actually curates the spaces. And I saw Louise earlier, and I learned that we're down to just 2 units available. And I also just learned that 2 of the units have been leased collaboratively by 6 not-for-profits who use it for their Airbnbs to save them money when they bring visiting artists and other people into town. So again, really cool, and it's serving the goals that we had.
Give it up. David?
So this will be your halftime lull between 2 folks who actually build stuff, because I'm just a lawyer. This will be a lot less interesting. But I want to kind of pivot off of some of what you talked about, Mark. And I want to start with this from the New York Times, and just the recent past. According to the New York Times analysis of major cities across the country, about 75% of residential land in these cities is devoted exclusively to single-family homes. The prevalence of single-family zoning in the United States has created many community issues, including racial and economic segregation, insufficient housing supply to meet community needs, and NIMBYism related to all kinds of development proposals. So let me start there. And then going back to what I was given as the mission for this morning, and that is to discuss solving clear community-identified real estate issues. So I'm a land use guy, which means I have the opportunity to represent developers and try and create opportunities to build and develop sites and projects in the metro area around the state. The prevalence of NIMBYism is beyond. It is something that we now hire lobbyists and political consultants to help us navigate every time we're contemplating, in some cases, even the smallest land use entitlement. When I look at what Denver's doing, and Denver is right now focused on a number of issues. One of them is a broad effort to reform the zoning code, and they're calling it addressing equity in rezoning. So what does that mean? I imagine if I were to ask any of you what does addressing equity in rezoning mean, everybody would have a different opinion of that. Let me tell you how I'm thinking about equity in rezoning. Ran into my friend Dan Bartel last night, and we were talking about an old project that the councilman remembers, and it was a project that we sought to rezone in Denver's Crestmore neighborhood. It was a old, terribly kept church that was a synagogue and then a church. It was an eyesore in the community for many, many years. A number of developers had taken a run to try and rezone the site, all failing miserably. And then I had a client reach out and say, let's rezone this site. And my initial reaction to him was, all right, well, we're going to have to hire a bunch of lobbyists and kind of get moving. He had never hired a lobbyist in order to rezone a property before, let alone two, but we did. We hired 2 lobbyists. And worked for the next 2.5 or 3 years to entitle that site. It was an extraordinarily difficult process. There were a couple of times when I would drive my son across the Crestmore and Hilltop neighborhoods, and there were signs in front yards that were not at all nice about the project. And my son asked me on a couple of occasions, Dad, do all these people hate you? And of course I would say, no, they just hate the developer. But, the only person worse than the developer is their lawyer, so yeah, I guess they do. And we fought for a long time to get that project rezoned. And when you think about who you're representing through that process, of course you're representing the developer. You're also representing a bunch of people who don't yet live there, who are looking to make Denver their home. And after that fight that lasted as long as I've mentioned, and a couple of lawsuits that ensued after Denver City Council was bold in their approval, and that guy in particular was bold in his approval of that project, we now have somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 new people or families living in our community. Some of whom I've met, and they are friends. And it has added value to our community. So when I think about equity in rezoning, I think about how we make it more fair to rezone properties, because the Crestmore community, as you might guess, is not hugely integrated. It's a very affluent, mostly white community. Folks have plenty of extra time and money to engage in opposition to projects. And so when I think of equity, when I think of what Denver is engaging in, that's how I'm going to focus. And those are the kinds of things that I'm going to think about as we move forward in redesigning Denver's future and Denver's zoning code. Mark, you also spoke about regulatory response. You're 100% right. Developers don't always get it right. Sometimes they do. More often than not, we have one or two developers who just get it so flippin' wrong that it ruins it for everyone else. And I'll give an example of that because you talk about Title 32 districts. Metro districts in this state are a fundamental financing tool in order to build infrastructure for projects. Fundamental tool. Short of having a Title 32 metropolitan district, I would tell you we're going to have 2 or 3 of the largest developers in the world being able to cash fund infrastructure and put all of the cost into the sale price of the home, and it will make communities far less interesting because there'll be 3 developers. Hopefully I'll represent at least one. But there'll be 3 developers and everything will look the same. And yet this conversation about metropolitan districts has gone kind of off the rails. And there's so many opportunities to look at these Title 32 districts and figure out additional ways to finance affordability through these districts, and schools. Schools are a whole nother issue that we don't have time to talk about right now, but particularly in high growth areas in Colorado where the assessed value is trailing so far behind our projects, we can't finance and fund new construction for schools. And even when you have the assessed value, many of these communities aren't passing bonds. So Title 32 districts can provide opportunities for affordable housing, for school financing. It just takes some regulatory, some legislative modifications. Denver's also in the last couple of years taken a harder look at group housing, group homes, and has approved more unrelated parties moving into homes, which freaked out, a lot of the people who I was talking about at the beginning of this conversation. Like, oh my God, all of a sudden we're going to have all of these unrelated people living in homes in our community. Well, they already are, just FYI. And this is a great opportunity to move people into our communities at less expense. Alongside that, there's a large conversation about ADUs, accessory dwelling units, that oftentimes sit inconspicuously in people's backyards and house a mother-in-law, although that would be too close for my mother-in-law, or other people in the family, or just a person who wants to live in a community. And so ADUs are important. It's an important tool for Denver and our communities to adopt and to recognize that it might help to solve for some of these real estate issues. Mobility is something that has been discussed. We think about mobility in a lot of different ways. Let's talk about mobility in the most obvious way, walking. In Denver, on our ballot in November, will be a citizen initiative to place a pretty modest fee, in my estimation, on all homes and businesses that front sidewalks. For example, if you own a single-family home in Denver and you have 50 feet of frontage, which is your traditional width, it's about $2 a foot over the course of a year. It's about $100. That would finance $40 million a year to improve sidewalks and build sidewalks and fix sidewalks in Denver. We could actually fix all of the sidewalks in Denver with $40 million a year. You bond against that, you've got $900 million year one to go out and really build sidewalks, real mobility in our communities, helping many of the communities that don't have, I mean, go walk these neighborhoods. You know, these sidewalks aren't great. Further to the west, they aren't great. Albus could probably tell you about, you know, neighborhoods in Cole that suffer through some sidewalk issues. Today in Denver, you know who's responsible for fixing those sidewalks outside of your home. You are. You're responsible for fixing your own sidewalk. So you might have a day job, but your evening job would be as a project manager building a sidewalk in front of your house, which of course, well, you could do, but very few other people in this city could actually do. So pay attention, please, in November to that question on the ballot in Denver. A couple of other quick issues, and then I'll move on to you, Rachel. I do sit on the board of Colorado Mesa University in Grand Junction, and just a quick plug, we are engaging right now in a process to take state funds. The state just granted us pretty close to $50 million to build a brand new theater on campus at Mesa. And alongside that, we have a brand new hotel in Grand Junction called the Maverick. If anybody makes their way across the state, please let me know. I'll set you up at the Maverick. And so we're looking to integrate the theater, the hotel, with affordable student housing. And that's a whole new, and not new, but another area of import to communities, and that's how do we find affordability for our students. I know you've got the issue down at Metro. We certainly have it in Grand Junction. And so finding affordability and building a real public-private partnership between the theater and the hotel, some community space, some affordable housing. So if anybody's interested in having that conversation, Mark Falcone, I'd be happy to have that conversation with you. I think the last thing I just want to, one more plug, an old friend of mine is here, Diana Romero Campbell, who I went to high school with. She's running for Denver City Council from Southeast Denver. And I would just say, as we have these conversations, the only way to ensure that the good stuff happens in Denver is by electing the good people. So there's my plug for Diana, if she's still here. Find her website and support her. That's a seat that my mom was on city council back in the 90s, and that's the neighborhood I grew up in, so thanks.
David, thanks for saying that. Diana, are you here? I am. Wave your hands in the air, wave them like, give her a hand. We need good people in government. That's all I'm going to say about that. Rachel.
All right. I am going to pivot a little bit. I was asked to speak a little more on community projects and community engagement. So before I dive into some of our projects that we are currently working on and some of our past projects in the community, those that don't know the Wells Partnership well, we are an owner's rep firm. You'll hear me reference us as TWP quite a bit. We do project management from fruition through completion, including hiring architects, general contractors, helping with site designation and preparation. So we are across the board, and I'll get into some of our fun projects we're working on shortly. To hop into a little bit of prior engagement with some of my prior firms, some big projects that stood out to me in the community, as Albus had mentioned, Denver Public Schools, I was on 9 back-to-back projects, which was, I'll say, a lot. But it was growing up in the Denver Public Schools system. We're just we're just really prepping up the kids for a better situation. We're finally actually giving them AC here in the next upcoming years. So these summers won't be as brutal as they go back into schools. I think Albus actually had his son's first day at East this week. So really, through the years, we've tried to base ourselves on community projects. One that really resonates with me, I managed a park called Paco Sanchez that is in a very underserved area on 14th and Knox, Federal and Colfax, so definitely working on growing that area. Girls Inc. is right there, which they're making a huge impact, but this was an 11-acre park. It's very modern. They based it on the first Hispanic radio station, who was created by Paco Sanchez, who the park was dedicated to. The community did a great job. It was with City and County of Denver, as well as the Parks and Rec group. And the community outreach that they have done has just been incredible. I've been back over the years it's been open. They do anything from concerts to food trucks, community games and events. So it's been great to see. I got to take my 7-year-old nephew there a couple of weeks ago, so that was pretty exciting. Outside of that, just some of my personal engagement, I'd say I had quite a hand on the most recent Welton Street revival down in 5 Points, another area that has been in our community forever, and we're trying to get that community back, and that's through art and involving as many of the local community members that we can. On top of that, I was nudged a bit to talk about Crew Denver, which is a commercial real estate group for women that I am on the board of directors for and have been involved with for about 6 years or so. And they just have given us so many good volunteer opportunities, as well as engagement with opportunities to go talk to high school students who are not quite sure what they want to go to college for, just introduce them to the construction management. We speak to all of the Colorado colleges and all of the essentially women, but also men that are in those programs currently. So a lot of community outreach just outside of what we are currently building and developing. So with that, I will hop into some of our fun projects we have going. So a lot of these will be familiar to everyone. The Butterfly Pavilion, which is existing, we are working on the fundraising stage to move this project to Broomfield. It's going to be much larger, and as opposed to a butterfly pavilion, it's going to house up to four, I believe, different economic and different habitats. So Butterfly's mission, of course, is to educate everyone on how to best protect any of these threatened habitats and how to educate all of us to further that preservation. We've been working on this project for quite some time. As we all know, fundraising right now is a little bit difficult post-COVID. So just working on those fundraising efforts and collaborating with the community has been a very big push for us. Next is one that everyone is aware of, which is going to be some expansion on the stock show. The Legacy at National and Western Center, excuse me, is going to be an expansion onto the existing. This will be a construction start in 2023 and will be connected to the existing livestock with large community space as well as viewing areas into the existing space. So great expansion, and we have been engaged since about 2018, working through all the fundraising with a lot of great local partners, as well as Pete Kors, who's helping steer that forward. So great project, and of course, this will just help to expand their annual livestock events that they have. I always have to get my bow ties out for that one. All right, one that has been completed as of 2020 was the Rocky Mountain Public Media, which is located in Lodo. And RMPBS is how it's better known, is of course the largest statewide organization that tens of thousands of our local community rely on for journalism, community outreach, community stories, as well as educational resources. I've since been in there while it's open. They have done a great job of bringing in local schools and communities, getting children engaged, doing really fun events. So that's a really good new plug down in Lodo. And they have broadcast studios where they can, they're opening it up, pretty much opening their doors to a lot of people. So it's been really interesting to see some of the locals come up and share their stories. This very, very old photo that I dug up is one that's underway. It's a bit new for us and one that I am helping lead, so it's a pretty exciting one. It's located on the Fitzsimmons-Anschutz campus. And as we all know, that's a very historic and growing, like crazy area. So the Fitzsimmons Chapel is near and dear to a lot of people's hearts. It's been out of use for about 3 decades now. So we had a pretty big philanthropic individual come up to us wanting to revitalize this. So we are going to be working on the revitalization and creating a non-denominational church for the overall campus, and that'll be for VA, hospital, the university, Anschutz, and then the Fitzsimmons campus. And besides the large Building 500, which is currently, thankfully, an upgrade zone right now, it has not been touched for a while as well, but they are the last 2 military buildings that are left on the campus. So built in the 40s, military base shut down just before the 2000s. And so there's a lot of city push as well on this, so backing from Aurora. We're working really closely with them on historic designation at the moment, as well as working with Fitzsimmons Innovation Community and a handful of other individuals that are really dead set on making this project move forward. So we will be working through that revitalization. A little fun fact, if you ever make it over there, in the Building 500, back in when Eisenhower was in office, he was out here visiting some family, suffered a heart attack, and spent quite some time in the wing over at Building 500. They still have it dedicated, have his ashtray by his old bed, a little different. So it's a big revitalization we're working on right now. So point being here, with just a handful of projects I've gone over, they're all posed towards a community, they're all posed towards fundraising. We're involving as many local groups as we can, whether it's architects, GCs, fundraising efforts, and then also just involving the community on, whether that's bringing art to the campus or, any local artists, any career opportunities, career fairs to best open the doors to the local community and serve that best. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Great. Give it up for Rachel. That's awesome. Okay, we got a little more time for some questions. Great presentations, you all. I do want to mention National Western. One of the things has never been done in Denver's history, and we passed this before I was booted out of office. But it is an impact fund. So once all of these buildings are operational, there will be a 1% fee that will go on every ticket of anybody who comes to these facilities, that will go to the community for whatever the community desires. There is a community board that's put together, and they will be able to talk about infrastructure projects, revitalization projects, and so some of those funds are going to be used for that, which is really cool. I want to ask you guys a couple questions, and I'm going to ask you some individually. One, we have a lot of folks from the nonprofit community, affordable housing community here, in kind of a rapid fire, maybe some suggestions and advice, innovation around public-private partnerships. How do these individuals who are here in this room, what advice would you give them about engaging in public-private relationships? We'll start with you, Mark.
Well, again, I think that the platform that Community Connection has established, what Ed's working on with his team, is a great way for not-for-profits who, especially those that aren't in the business of real estate on a day in and day out basis, to have access to the kind of expertise that can really help solve problems, help you actually pull together a proper sources and uses, really understand what it's going to take to realistically achieve what your outcome is. I will say that one of the things that we've confronted more recently is the sort of idea that these public-private partnerships that are led by cities, when you've got a big budget problem with a project, there is not necessarily a shooting star solution by just simply calling it a public-private venture. And we've run into a couple of situations where people have, gone to thought that they could solve their very large budget gap with a real estate solution that's driven by the private sector. And I think there's a lot of disconnect there. So I think you got to be a little bit cautious on the public side.
I'm going to push this one over to you, David.
So I'm going to go back to, and Mark, I'll ask maybe a question of you in passing it back, but I'm going to go back to a point that I was raising earlier, and that is kind of understanding the political realities of development, particularly for-profit developers, and the difficulties that they face in terms of entitlements. Man, and I hate to sound just making this so transactional, but meet people where they are. And so if you are a senior housing affordable builder, or you're a student housing affordable builder, or you're a 60 to 80% LIHTC builder, I would reach out to the folks who are doing the bigger deals in the community and try to join the team. I think the value you bring to the team going through an entitlement process is incredible. I would put a affordable housing developer in front of a city council to tell their story long before, nothing personal, I'd stick Mark Falcone in front of a city council to talk about his project. I think that it will just create kind of that synergy and maybe get us to a finish line. So hate to sound so transactional, Albus, but I think that it would help if the non-profit community kind of recognize those opportunities.
Definitely, and I'll just say, someone sitting in the seat for 8 years, my best ideas actually came from the public, right? It came from affordable housing developers. It came from individuals in the public who brought ideas to us that we could then move to the city in an expeditious way. And so I would say be bold, find someone, a champion within city government, and push the door down. Question, I'm gonna actually do some personal questions to each of you that you mentioned on here. And David, you got 3. I'm gonna give you 3. You're king for a day. You're land use king for a day. You will get 10 votes on city council, which overrides the mayor, and you can change anything in zoning in the city and county of Denver. What are the 3 major changes would you do to our current zoning in Denver? Land use expert over here.
Oh my God. Just 3? I mean, one is I would change the role and the influence of neighborhood organizations. And let me just be a little bit more specific about that. I think transparency is obviously important. I think community engagement is important. What I realize, and what most people don't, is that the folks who show up to these neighborhood meetings have literally nothing else to do. And they are always angry people. They're always the angry ones.
Tell us how you really feel.
They're the angry ones. Because the people who are happy in Denver are at home. They're with their families, they're having dinner, and they're not actually as engaged. And so I would figure out a mechanism to kind of rebalance the influence of the neighborhood organizations. and try and kind of navigate that a little bit. I would speed it up. I would speed up the process. I think I would just try and get emails and calls back from city officials from time to time. I think that's one of the biggest problems we're facing in Denver right now, is just responsiveness. So I'd speed up the process. I think when I started practicing many, many years ago, we would say we could rezone a property in 3 to 6 months. I can't envision rezoning a property in less than 18 months at this point. That's the reality. And the city has added additional layers. They've added regulatory processes, large development review, which is LDR is probably the most hated acronym amongst developers in town right now because it adds even more time. So those are a couple.
Those are two. You got one more. And now you can change the zoning code.
I'll send an email to everybody later with
All right,
my
great.
third.
But you gotta push them. You gotta push them. All right, Rachel. This is a question for you. Your generation is the largest workforce in America today. You all no longer, your workforce no longer wants. You're not just about the bottom line. This is a workforce of triple bottom line. You got a lot of leaders in here of organizations who are hiring individuals what do they need to know? How can they be prepared? What kind of structure, business, organization do they need to curate to make sure that your generation thrives in their business?
Gotta love my generation. Love that I'm tethered to it. I'm a little on the other side. I have always been in office. I did not like working from home. I like the collaborative and culture of an office space and getting to know your team. I'd say that is probably not on the favored side for my generation. So I'd say really it's bringing back the culture. And even if you are in a hybrid state or even a work from home state, finding ways to engage everyone. And it's not just my generation, it's, I'm even seeing it, VP levels are getting to the point where it's nice working from home. They might live a little bit further up in the mountains and no one wants to deal with the Denver traffic these days. So it's, I think it's really just trying to create some form of community again. We've been so lost out, and I'm not even going to talk about COVID because I'm very over it, and as are we all. So I'd say really it's just creating those opportunities, creating for, I'd say the younger workforce, creating a champion or mentor. I personally have been lucky enough to have great mentors as well as, mentor anyone from college age through, late 20s, early 30s. So it's been a great opportunity for me, and I think people are getting, especially the younger, are not as scared to answer or ask questions. And that would be my biggest advocate for anyone younger. Just push them, make sure they have that advocate, that they're not feeling like they're silenced. A lot of times that's the fear, and they're worried that they're gonna come off seeming a little silly for asking the question, or especially in the construction world, we have a lot of acronyms, and we all get lost in them. So I think just trying to bring back that community, and whether it's team building efforts or just a simple, hey, we're doing a little cocktail mixer type of thing. So
That's good. And Mark, I was at your office this week, and Senator Bennett was there with an African American community. We talk about city building. I talk about it a lot. I talk about building an inclusive city where everyone can thrive. But we've set up specific laws and barriers targeted to communities, particularly African American community, which is at the lowest social determinant of every area in this country: health, jobs, education, and housing. You heard a lot that night. What what are your ideas, particularly in this community, and we can say African Americans and also Latinos and women in this industry? What are your ideas to really target and make sure that these people groups can actually thrive and be a part of the success of the city?
You know, there's a lot of layers to that question. I think for me, the easiest, most focused place to put energy would be home ownership with African Americans in the U.S., especially those that can trace ancestry to a legacy here that, you know, was heavily influenced by redlining and other injustices before that. You know, I think the people of African descent in the U.S. represent 13% of the country's population. It is not a number that we could not find an economic response for. And honestly, if you created a GI Bill for home ownership for people who qualified within those kinds of contexts, and we've been through that stuff before. We did it for Native Americans. We figured out how to, you know, identify people who should qualify for benefits. I think it would be a huge economic driver. And I think it would create an appropriate reparation at the same time where it would add real energy and momentum to, you know, home building in probably places that could really use it. So you know, there's a lot of other things you could think about, but there's literally no segment of our population that, you know, that suffered the economic consequence that African Americans did. And I think that would be a very obvious sort of opportunity.
Thank you. Now you guys get the opportunity to ask a question. We have some mics up there. We have about 7 minutes left. So you need to move fast. Okay, we got one right here. Bill.
Many years ago, the Transit Alliance created something called the Citizens Academy. It's moved over the years. It was helpful to get fast tracks passed, things like that. It's evolved. Dr. Cog now houses it. It's called the Civic Academy. It was useful for getting the fast tracks passed, the vote for the sales tax increase. From a land use standpoint, is there an opportunity there to move the needle a little bit, to educate the population, to make the NIMBYs into YIMBYs, something along those lines? I'm interested. David?
I don't have a silver bullet for the question. But I think getting through, at least initially, through the clutter and you know, figuring out easy ways of describing it. You know, like this sidewalk issue in Denver. This is an easy issue, right? 400 years under the current financing scheme in Denver, it would take to build sidewalks in Denver. 400 years. So we need to figure out a way to make the conversation around transit and development kind of an easier way to connect. We're in a battle over Pena Station right now. This is a project, you know, it's the last stop on the way to the airport, a 400-acre site. No joke, we've been in a process in the city for over 18 months trying to put this deal together. Further no joke, 18 months after starting this process, we got a letter from Denver Public Schools that they are either going to buy or condemn 15 acres next to the transit station. No joke. How Denver Public Schools doesn't understand that that's not an appropriate location for a 15-acre school site next to a transit station, and then you're asking me this question, right. It's at the highest levels where there is absolute incompetency.
Another question.
Hi, are these public-private partnerships, have they been helpful at all in overcoming, say, a neighbor who is sworn to never give you access? I have a 5-acre piece of land around 52nd and Tennyson. It's already zoned for apartments, and it is just a you know, the sworn statement from the neighbors that they'll never give us access. And it's just it's become a, you know, you wait and see sort of thing, or I need to bulldoze this guy. So it's, you know, and it's, we don't, and it's I'm kind of sick of this sort of wait because it's been like a generational sort of thing, multi-decade, that's too long. Like, I mean, so I'm in just an economic situation where I want to make that area yield. So it's, you know, so we're literally in a situation where I'm thinking about rezoning 5 acres ready to go for apartments around 52nd and Tennyson, just so I can put something on it, because we can because if we do storage or something like that, we can go through the industrial park that we own that's adjacent to it. But you can't have an apartment building cutting through an industrial park to get to it. So it's just like, from a government standpoint, it's like, it doesn't even intrude on them. It's like, you gotta let us just turn into this entire thing that we'll put anything on there if you help us get it to the point where it can be more than just land, you know? And sorry, that was very long.
Yeah. So, and I just want you to know, it's a little bit hard to hear questions up here. I don't know if that's just me. Okay, it is. Good. I think I generally understand your question, and I'm going to answer it in 2 ways. One is, there are new schemes to slow down development, okay? Access is one of them, okay? Alleys is another one of them. Historic designation is another one of them that we see in Denver. They're just tools that others are using to stymie development. The answer to your question is pretty simple. City Council. There is always an opportunity for City Council to get access. Denver controls access. The city and county controls access. DOTI, you know, the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, they're in charge of access. And so you just need, you know, a partner at the city to actually say, we're doing this, and we're going to give access, whether that means a condemnation for, you know, reasonable access, or maybe you have a historic right to access, but that's a fact-intensive question that I am not going to be able to answer for you right now. But it's just another in a series of ways to stymie development.
Thank you. Can you give it up for our panelists, please? I'm going to bring up Emily, and she's going to close us out. Give it up for her, too.
Thank you to Albus. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to Foster Graham, Milstein, and Kalisher for sponsoring today. And thank you all for coming, for showing up to an event like this, and really pushing yourselves to think more about how we can put more community benefit into various real estate projects. Come reach out to us at Sharing Connection, and we're really excited to connect with you all. And I think you're on our newsletter list now, so hopefully you can come to a future event as well. Thanks all.